The Force was screaming. Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi had felt disturbances before. The corrupting presence of Sith Lords, the chaos of massive battles, the death cries of entire populations. But this was different. This was reality itself, rejecting what was happening. Space and time, twisting in ways that violated every natural law the Force was meant to uphold. "Master, the signal's getting stronger," Ahsoka Tano called from the co-pilot's seat of the Republic cruiser Resolute, her montrals twitching with agitation. "But the readings don't make sense. It's not Sith energy, it's impossible," Anakin Skywalker finished, his hands gripping the controls with white-knuckled intensity. His blue eyes reflected the viewport's readings, which showed spatial distortions that shouldn't exist. "The signal is coming from inside a dimensional fold. Master, if we follow this, we could end up anywhere. Or nowhere." Obi-Wan stood behind them, one hand stroking his beard in the gesture that always preceded difficult decisions. The mysterious transmission they'd been tracking for 3 days had led them to the outer rim, then beyond it, into uncharted space where no Republic vessel had any business being. The Supreme Chancellor himself had authorized this mission after the signal was intercepted by Republic intelligence. A Sith communication, they'd said, possibly leading to Dooku or even Sidious. But now, standing on the edge of something that made the Force itself recoil, Obi-Wan questioned whether this had been a trap all along. "We've come too far to turn back now," he decided. "If this is a Sith operation, we need to know what they're planning. Anakin, take us in, slowly." Define slowly when we're about to fly into a hole in reality, Anakin muttered, but he adjusted their trajectory toward the distortion. The space ahead rippled like water disturbed by an unseen hand. Stars bent around an invisible point, their light stretching and compressing in ways that hurt to look at. The ship's sensors screamed warnings: gravitational anomalies, temporal flux, dimensional instability. But Anakin kept them on course with the kind of piloting that only he could manage, threading through gravitational shears that would have torn apart any other ship. Then, the distortion opened. Not gradually, not with warning, but like a mouth suddenly yawning wide to swallow them whole. The Republic cruiser plunged into chaos, a tunnel of fractured light where colors that had no names burned against darkness that was somehow alive. The hull groaned under stresses it was never designed to withstand. Alarms shrieked. And through it all, the Force was a hurricane of contradictory sensations that made Obi-Wan's trained mind struggle to maintain composure. "Shield's failing," Ahsoka reported, her voice rising with alarm. "Hull integrity at 70% and dropping." Anakin fought the controls as space itself seemed to attack them. "I can't stabilize. It's like flying through a star going supernova while being pulled into a black hole simultaneously." Then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The cruiser burst out of the distortion into normal space, or what appeared to be normal space. Stars shone in unfamiliar configurations. A planet hung before them, blue-green and beautiful, with white clouds and visible continents that suggested Earth-like conditions. But the sensors told a different story. "By the Force," Obi-Wan breathed, staring at the tactical display. "Are these readings accurate?" Clone Commander Cody moved to his station, running diagnostics with military efficiency. "Sir, sensors are calibrated correctly, but what they're showing is..." "General Kenobi, I'm detecting hundreds of energy signatures across the planet. Individual power readings that match capital ship reactors, but they're biological. Living beings with a power output of warships?" Anakin's mechanical hand flexed unconsciously. "That's impossible. And yet..." Obi-Wan gestured to the display, which showed a planetary surface covered in what could only be described as a massive civilization. Cities sprawled across continents, but their architecture was unlike anything in Republic databases. Crystalline structures grew from the earth like living things. Metal formations that seemed organic rather than constructed. And everywhere, energy signatures that defied categorization. Ahsoka leaned forward, her Force senses extended. "Master Obi-Wan, I can feel them. The beings down there. They're not like any life forms we've encountered. Some feel almost elemental, like they're made of pure energy or emotion given physical form. Dark side? Obi-Wan asked carefully. No. Ahsoka's voice held confusion. That's what's strange. They feel powerful, overwhelming even, but not corrupted. Not evil, just different. Like the Force here operates under different rules. Anakin's expression darkened. Nothing about this feels right. Master, we need to report back to the Council, get reinforcements before... The communication console erupted with static, then cut to dead silence. Every system tied to long-range communications simply stopped. Sir, we've lost all connection to the Republic network, Cody reported grimly. Hyperspace communicator is offline. Subspace relays aren't responding. It's like we're cut off from the entire galaxy. A chill ran down Obi-Wan's spine. Can we jump back through the distortion? Negative, sir. The dimensional fold collapsed behind us. There's no trace of it on sensors. For all intents and purposes, we're stranded here until we can determine what happened and how to reverse it. The three Jedi exchanged glances. Years of partnership allowing wordless communication. They were alone, in an unknown star system, on a planet that registered life forms with impossible power levels, with no way to contact the Republic or return home. Well, Obi-Wan said with forced calm, when in doubt, make first contact. Perhaps the inhabitants can explain where we are and how we got here. Anakin, take us down. Find a landing site away from major population centers. We don't want to alarm anyone. Too late for that, Ahsoka interjected, pointing at the tactical display. Sir, I'm reading incoming contacts. Fast movers, dozens of them, converging on our position from multiple directions. The sensors showed what could only be described as aerial units, but not ships. Individual life signs moving through the atmosphere at speeds that rivaled Republic fighters, but without any technological signatures at all. They're flying, Anakin said incredulously. Hundreds of beings, flying without ships or jetpacks, and some of them are registering energy outputs that match our cruiser's main reactor. Dragons, Cody muttered, staring at the visual feed as massive winged forms became visible in the distance. Sir, those are actual dragons, and they're heading straight for us. Obi-Wan watched the approaching forms with the kind of calm that came from decades of impossible situations. Defensive posture, but do not fire unless fired upon. We're intruders in their space. Let's not start an interstellar incident. The cruiser descended through the atmosphere, its Republic markings clearly visible to anyone watching. As they broke through the cloud layer, the true scope of what they'd stumbled into became clear. This was not a primitive world. This was an advanced civilization, but one that had developed along completely different technological lines. The capital city spread below them, if it could be called a city, was a marvel of architecture that blended natural and constructed elements so seamlessly that it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Crystal towers grew from the earth like trees. Streets paved with what looked like living metal pulsed with energy. And everywhere, beings that defied classification moved through their daily lives. I'm seeing humanoids, reptilians, insectoids, and things I don't even have categories for, Ahsoka reported, her voice filled with wonder despite the danger. Master Obi-Wan, this is an entire civilization of beings that would be considered monsters or myths in the Republic. Perhaps here, they're simply citizens, Obi-Wan replied. Anakin, land in that clearing outside the city proper. And everyone, be prepared for anything. The cruiser settled onto a grassy field with surprising gentleness, its landing struts deploying to find stable ground. Through the viewport, they could see the welcoming committee that had assembled with remarkable speed. A dozen figures stood at respectful distance, but their body language suggested readiness for combat rather than friendly greeting. At the forefront stood beings that radiated power so intensely that even non-force sensitives would have felt it. A man with crimson hair and demonic features, flames flickering around his form. Benimaru, though they didn't know his name yet, radiating combat prowess that made Anakin's hand drift toward his lightsaber. A woman with purple hair and an executioner's blade, her presence suggesting raw physical power that could shatter durasteel with bare hands. Shion, whose unique skill made reality itself uncertain in her presence. A figure in elegant black clothing with golden eyes that held ancient malevolence, barely constrained by perfect courtesy. Diablo, a primordial demon who could unmake existence with a thought, but chose to kneel before his master instead. And more. Each one a powerhouse that would qualify as a strategic-level threat in the Republic's military classification. But it was the figure at the center who commanded attention, despite appearing the least threatening physically. A young man with blue hair and golden eyes, dressed in casual modern clothing that looked completely out of place in this fantasy setting. He stood with relaxed confidence, but the Jedi all felt it. This being's power dwarfed everyone around him, a presence so vast it was like trying to comprehend a star while standing on its surface. Rimuru Tempest, Obi-Wan murmured, somehow knowing the name through the Force, even though no one had spoken it. The leader of this nation. He's not human, Anakin said quietly, his Force senses analyzing what they were perceiving. He's wearing a human shape, but underneath. Master, he's something else entirely. Something that could destroy this entire city without effort if he chose to. And yet he chooses not to, Ahsoka observed. I sense protection from him, not threat. He's dangerous, but not to us. Not yet. Obi-Wan made his decision. We go out unarmed, lightsabers on our belts but not drawn. This is first contact and we represent the Republic. Let's show them we come in peace. The boarding ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss, and the 3 Jedi descended to meet the unknown. Clone troopers remained aboard at Obi-Wan's signal. This needed to be a diplomatic encounter, not a military one. As they approached the assembled beings of Tempest, Obi-Wan extended his senses through the Force, trying to understand what they were facing. What he found was chaos. Not malevolent chaos, but the chaos of 100 different life forms radiating power in 100 different ways that the Force had no framework to categorize. It was like trying to read a book written in 1,000 languages simultaneously. But one presence cut through the confusion with crystal clarity. Rimuru Tempest himself, whose power was so overwhelming that it created a kind of clarity through sheer magnitude. And within that power, Obi-Wan sensed something unexpected. Genuine curiosity mixed with caution, concern for his people, and a mind analyzing the Jedi with the kind of tactical assessment that recognized fellow protectors. The woman with purple hair, Shion, spoke first, her voice carrying both respect and warning. Master Rimuru, these humans are emitting terrifying spiritual pressure. They're clearly warriors of significant capability. The crimson-haired demon, Benimaru, had flames dancing around his fists. Should we prepare for combat? Their vessel is armed, and their energy signatures suggest they could pose a threat. But Rimuru raised one hand, and everyone fell silent. He studied the Jedi with eyes that seemed to see far more than any human should be capable of perceiving, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that needed no volume to command respect. You 3, he said directly to the Jedi, you're not from this world, are you? Obi-Wan stepped forward, hand outstretched in the universal gesture of peace. We are not. I am Obi-Wan Kenobi, Jedi Master of the Galactic Republic. These are my companions, Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker and Padawan Ahsoka Tano. We arrived here by accident through a spatial anomaly we don't fully understand. We mean no harm to you or your people. Rimuru's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement if the situation weren't so tense. Jedi, Galactic Republic. Those terms mean nothing here, but I believe you about the accident. Your arrival timing is... He glanced skyward, where dark clouds were beginning to gather in defiance of all meteorological logic. Unfortunately, catastrophic. We seek only to understand where we are and how to return home, Obi-Wan continued. If we've intruded on your territory, we apologize and will... "It's too late for that," Rimuru interrupted, his tone suddenly grim. The playful curiosity vanished, replaced by the bearing of a leader preparing for war. "You arrived at literally the worst possible moment. The Tenma war has been building for weeks, and today is the day Heaven's forces finally decided to make their move." Anakin's hand dropped to his lightsaber hilt. "Heaven's forces? What does that mean?" "It means," a new voice spoke from shadows that shouldn't have existed in broad daylight. Diablo, his golden eyes gleaming with something that made even Anakin's impressive courage falter. "That divine judgment has been declared upon our nation. The celestial host has decided that monsters such as us should not be permitted to exist, and they've sent their armies to erase us from existence. It's all very dramatic and self-righteous." Ahsoka looked between Rimuru and his subordinates, trying to piece together the situation. "You're saying gods are attacking you? Actual deities?" "The Tenma," Rimuru confirmed. "Celestial beings who serve what they consider absolute divine order. They view our nation, a civilization where monsters, demons, and humans live together as equals, as an abomination against the natural order. We've been preparing for this war for months, but they chose today to launch their assault." He smiled without humor. "And you three chose today to drop from the sky in a ship that screams, 'foreign military vessel.' My people are understandably concerned." The sky darkened further, and Obi-Wan felt something through the Force that made his trained composure crack slightly. It was similar to the dark side, absolute, judgmental, convinced of its own righteousness, but purer somehow. Colder. The dark side at least acknowledged passion and emotion. What he was sensing now felt like judgment divorced from all humanity. Absolute certainty that knew no doubt or mercy. "They're here," Rimuru said quietly, and the playful leader vanished entirely, replaced by something that made the air itself feel heavy. "Everyone, battle stations, protect the civilians, prioritize the evacuation zones, and remember, the Tenma don't take prisoners." Benimaru's entire body ignited with flames that should have incinerated everything around him, but somehow left even the grass unsinged. "Finally, I've been waiting for this." Shion hefted her massive blade with one hand, grinning with the kind of battle lust that made Anakin look restrained by comparison. "Time to show Heaven what happens when you threaten Master Rimuru's city." And Diablo simply smiled, an expression of such profound malevolence that even Obi-Wan felt the urge to step back. "I shall educate these self-proclaimed divine beings on the difference between celestial authority and primordial terror." The sky split open, not metaphorically. The actual sky tore apart like fabric, revealing something beyond that hurt to look at directly. A space that was too bright, too perfect, too absolute in its rejection of mortal reality. And from that tear poured the Tenma host. They were beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Humanoid forms wrapped in armor that seemed to be made of condensed light, wings that burned with holy fire, faces that held no expression because expression implied emotion, and these beings were beyond such mortal concerns. They moved with mechanical precision, thousands of them flooding from the tear in coordinated formations that spoke of military discipline refined over eons. And at their center, beings that registered as something far more dangerous, God-class entities whose mere presence made reality strain at the seams, whose power output made even Rimuru's subordinates look manageable by comparison. Anakin stared at the descending host with growing horror. "Master, they feel like the dark side, but they're not. They're something else, something that thinks it's righteous." "Absolute certainty without wisdom," Obi-Wan replied quietly. "The kind of judgment that destroyed the Sith of old and would destroy the Jedi if we ever forgot that we too can be wrong. They've convinced themselves that their cause is so righteous that any action in its service is justified." Ahsoka ignited her lightsabers, dual green blades that hummed with familiar comfort in this alien world. "So what do we do?" Obi-Wan looked at Rimuru. who had transformed from casual leader to something that made the surrounding space feel compressed, as if reality was struggling to contain his presence. Their eyes met, and in that moment, two protectors recognized each other across the gulf of different universes and different philosophies. "We seek peace," Obi-Wan said slowly, "but we defend those who cannot defend themselves. These people, monsters though they may appear, are clearly civilians, and those beings descending from the sky have come not to negotiate, but to exterminate. That makes our choice clear." Rimuru's smile was genuine this time, touched with respect. "You don't even know us, and you're willing to fight beside us?" "We're Jedi," Anakin said simply, his own lightsaber igniting in a blade of blue fire. "It's what we do." The first Tenma forces struck the city's outer barriers with the kind of coordinated assault that suggested they'd done this many times before. Magical shields flared and shattered. Defensive towers returned fire with energy beams that would have impressed Republic engineers. And across the city, Tempest's forces mobilized with the kind of disciplined chaos that spoke of a nation that had prepared for this moment. Rimuru turned to his subordinates. "All forces, defend the capital. Priority is civilian evacuation and containment of Tenma penetration into residential zones. Benimaru, take the eastern approach. Shion, western perimeter. Diablo, I shall handle any God-class entities that prove troublesome." Diablo finished with disturbing cheer. "It has been far too long since I was permitted to engage in wholesale slaughter of divine beings. Try to keep the collateral damage minimal," Rimuru said, though his tone suggested he knew it was a futile request. Then he turned to the Jedi. "You three, if you're serious about helping, stay close to me. The Tenma will target you as foreign contaminants the moment they sense you. Your energy signatures are completely different from anything in this world, which makes you priority threats in their assessment." "Wonderful," Anakin muttered. "We went from chasing Sith to fighting gods in the span of an hour. This is going to look great in my mission report." "If we survive to make a mission report," Ahsoka added. But her stance was ready. Her lightsabers held in reverse grip in the Jar-Kai style she'd perfected. Obi-Wan simply centered himself in the Force, accepting the chaos and finding calm within it. "Very well, Rimuru Tempest. Let's show these divine beings what happens when they threaten the innocent. Lead the way." Rimuru grinned, and for just a moment, something vast and terrible and absolutely beyond mortal comprehension flickered behind his eyes. A glimpse of the true power he'd been restraining. "Welcome to the Tenma War, Jedi. Try to keep up." Then the battle truly began, and the Jedi of the Galactic Republic found themselves fighting beside a nation of monsters against an army of angels, in a war that would test everything they believed about power, justice, and the thin line between protection and domination. The sky burned, the earth shook, and three warriors from a galaxy far, far away discovered that the Force was not the only power in the multiverse capable of miracles and horror in equal measure. The Tenma assault came in waves that defied conventional military logic. They didn't advance cautiously or probe for weaknesses. They simply descended with absolute confidence in their divine mandate, believing their righteousness would overcome any resistance. It was the kind of arrogance that Obi-Wan had seen before in Sith Lords and corrupt politicians, but magnified to cosmic scale. The difference was that the Tenma had the power to back up their arrogance. "Incoming," Ahsoka called out, her Montrals giving her early warning as a squadron of Tenma warriors broke from the main force and dove toward their position. They were angel-like beings, but with nothing of the benevolence that term usually implied. Humanoid forms encased in armor that seemed to be made of solidified light, wings that burned with holy fire, and faces that held no expression because expression required the kind of humanity these beings had long since abandoned. Rimuru raised one hand almost casually, and the space between them and the attacking Tenma simply changed. Reality bent, twisted, and the divine warriors found themselves redirected mid-flight, their trajectories altered by manipulation of space itself. They crashed into each other with impacts that created shockwaves, their divine armor cracking from collision with their own kind. Spatial manipulation, Obi-Wan observed, his analytical mind cataloging the technique even as they moved toward the city's defensive positions. You're not just powerful, you're rewriting the fundamental laws of physics. One of many tricks, Rimuru replied, his tone light despite the apocalyptic battle unfolding around them. The Tenma operate under the assumption that divine authority supersedes natural law. I simply remind them that there are beings who exist outside their divine hierarchy. Now come on. The real fight is at the eastern gate. Benimaru's probably already engaged. They ran through streets that were transforming from peaceful city to active war zone with frightening speed. Civilians, and Obi-Wan had to consciously remind himself that these goblins, ogres, and various monster species were indeed civilians, evacuated in organized groups led by militia forces. It was impressive coordination, the kind that spoke of a society that had drilled for exactly this scenario. They're ready for this, Anakin observed, his mechanical hand flexing as he ran. This isn't the first time they've been attacked. We've faced aggression since our nation's founding, Rimuru confirmed. When monsters dare to create a civilization that rivals human kingdoms, when demons and humans live as equals, the established powers tend to react poorly. The Tenma are just the most recent and most dangerous threat. The Eastern Gate came into view, and with it, carnage on a scale that made Clone Wars battlefields look restrained. Benimaru stood at the center of an inferno, his entire body wreathed in flames that burned hot enough to melt stone, but somehow left the city's architecture untouched. He moved through Tenma warriors like a force of nature, each strike creating explosions of fire that consumed divine beings who'd probably never imagined they could burn. But there were so many of them. For every Tenma Benimaru destroyed, 3 more descended from the tear in the sky, their formations never breaking, their assault relentless as a tide. Hell flare, Benimaru roared, and the flames around him condensed into a massive sphere that he launched at a cluster of Tenma. The explosion would have vaporized a city block, but the crimson-haired warrior had perfect control. The flames consumed only enemies, leaving allies and infrastructure untouched. That's impossible, Ahsoka breathed. That level of precision with that much destructive power. No Force user could manage it, not even Master Yoda. Different power system, Rimuru explained as they approached the battle. Magic here isn't about midichlorians or mystical energy fields. It's about will, belief, and magicules, the fundamental energy that composes this world. Benimaru isn't channeling external power. He is that power, given form and purpose. 3 Tenma warriors spotted them and broke formation, diving with weapons of pure light that hummed with frequencies designed to unmake flesh. Obi-Wan's lightsaber snapped into his hand, the blue blade igniting with its familiar hum. Form 3, Sorasu, he murmured, settling into the defensive stance he'd perfected over decades. The first Tenma struck with inhuman speed, its light blade crashing against Obi-Wan's lightsaber with a sound like breaking glass. The Jedi Master's blade moved in the defensive patterns that had kept him alive through countless battles, deflecting strikes that would have bisected a lesser warrior. But these weren't battle droids, or even Sith. The Tenma fought with mechanical precision that never tired, never made mistakes, never allowed openings through fatigue or emotion. It was like fighting a computer program optimized for killing, and Obi-Wan felt the strain immediately. "Master!" Ahsoka engaged 2 more Tenma simultaneously, her dual lightsabers spinning in the aggressive Jar Kai style. She was faster than Obi-Wan, more acrobatic, using her youth and agility to stay ahead of the Divine Warrior's strikes. But even she was being pushed back, forced to give ground against enemies that simply wouldn't stop. Then Anakin arrived, and everything changed. The Chosen One lived up to his title, his gem-so form exploding with aggressive power that turned defense into overwhelming offense. His blue blade crashed against Tenma weapons with enough force to actually drive the Divine Warriors back, his mechanical hand allowing strikes that would have broken bones in his flesh arm. But more than that, Anakin channeled the Force with raw intensity, using telekinetic blasts to disrupt enemy formations and create openings for lethal strikes. "They're not alive," Anakin called out, his blade severing a Tenma's arm with a strike that should have drawn blood, but instead released pure light. "Not in any way I understand. It's like fighting Force constructs. There's no life to them, just purpose and power." "They're divine constructs," Rimuru confirmed, appearing beside the struggling Jedi with supernatural speed. "Angels of judgment, created by the Tenma gods to enforce their will. They have no souls, no individual consciousness, just absolute obedience to their programming." His golden eyes flashed, and suddenly the three Tenma fighting the Jedi simply stopped existing. Not destroyed in any visible way. They were there one moment and gone the next, erased from reality by power that made the Force itself seem quaint by comparison. "What did you do?" Obi-Wan demanded, panting slightly from the exertion of sustained combat. "Predation," Rimuru replied simply. "My ultimate skill. Beelzebub allows me to consume anything, matter, energy, even conceptual existences like these constructs. They're now stored in my dimensional stomach, their component energies absorbed and analyzed. It's efficient, but somewhat disturbing, I admit." Anakin stared at the space where the Tenma had been. "You ate them. You consumed divine warriors like they were food." "I prefer to think of it as recycling," Rimuru said with a slight smile. "But yes, essentially, it's one reason the Tenma consider me such a threat. I don't just defeat their forces. I permanently remove them from existence and add their power to my own. It's rather rude by their standards." The battle at the Eastern Gate intensified as more Tenma forces descended. Benimaru was joined by other powerful beings, lizardmen warriors who breathed dragon fire, ogre soldiers whose physical strength allowed them to literally punch through divine armor, and elemental spirits who commanded lightning and wind with casual mastery. But the Tenma kept coming, and among them now appeared something far more dangerous. "Oh no!" Rimuru's playful demeanor vanished instantly. "That's a Seraph class. Everyone fall back to secondary positions." From the tear in the sky descended a being that dwarfed the lesser Tenma in both size and power. It stood perhaps 15 feet tall, with 6 wings that burned with flames that made Benimaru's fires look like candle flickers. Its armor was somehow more solid than the constructs around it, suggesting actual divine matter rather than mere energy projection. And when it spoke, its voice carried authority that made reality itself seem to listen. "Abominations!" the Seraph thundered, its voice devoid of anything resembling compassion. "This gathering of monsters is declared anathema by divine decree. Surrender and be judged, or resist and be annihilated." "Third option," Rimuru called back, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos of battle. "You leave, we forget this happened, and nobody has to learn what happens when you push a Demon Lord too far." "Demon Lord Rimuru Tempest." The Seraph's faceless helm turned toward him with laser focus. "Your existence violates 17 divine mandates. Your nation's continued survival threatens the celestial order. Your people's equality with humans corrupts the natural hierarchy. This is not negotiable." "It never is with you types," Rimuru sighed. "You know what I've noticed about beings who claim divine authority? You're always absolutely certain you're right up until someone more powerful proves otherwise." The Seraph raised both hands, and holy energy gathered in spheres that pulsed with enough power to level city blocks. "Then you choose annihilation." "Actually, he chooses friends who don't let him fight alone." Diablo's voice came from nowhere and everywhere simultaneously. The primordial demon materialized from shadows that shouldn't exist in broad daylight, his golden eyes gleaming with malevolent joy. "How delightful! A Seraph-class divine construct. I haven't had the pleasure of destroying one of your kind in several centuries. Let's see if you remember why primordial demons are considered existential threats even by celestial standards." The Seraph's attention shifted to Diablo, and for the first time, something that might have been uncertainty flickered in its presence. Primordial demons and Seraph-class angels were natural enemies, locked in a cosmic conflict that predated most mortal civilizations. This was going to be devastating regardless of who won. All Jedi, take cover, Rimuru commanded, and the three Force users didn't argue. They could sense the sheer magnitude of power about to be unleashed. Diablo and the Seraph clashed in an explosion of darkness and light that created a shockwave felt across the entire city. Reality itself screamed in protest as primordial demon power met divine authority, two forces that fundamentally rejected each other's existence, trying to occupy the same space. "This is beyond anything I've sensed before," Obi-Wan said quietly, pressed against a barrier wall alongside Anakin and Ahsoka. Master Yoda at his peak, fighting Count Dooku, perhaps even the Supreme Chancellor if he's truly as powerful as some suspect. None of them register like this. This is power that could reshape worlds. Or destroy them, Anakin added, watching the battle with eyes that held fascination and horror in equal measure. "Master, how do we fight enemies like this? Our lightsabers, our force abilities, they seem almost quaint compared to what we're seeing." "We don't fight them directly," Obi-Wan replied. "We do what Jedi have always done. We find another way. Look." He pointed to a section of the defensive wall where Tenma constructs were overwhelming the monster defenders. A group of goblin civilians was trapped behind collapsing barriers, unable to evacuate with divine warriors closing in for the kill. The Seraph and Diablo's battle had everyone's attention, leaving these lesser threats unaddressed. "That's our role," Ahsoka understood immediately. "We're not here to fight gods. We're here to protect the people the gods are too busy fighting each other to notice." The three Jedi moved as one, years of partnership allowing wordless coordination. They crossed the battlefield with force-enhanced speed, arriving at the threatened position just as Tenma constructs broke through. This time, the Jedi didn't hold back. Obi-Wan's Soresu defense became a wall that nothing could penetrate, his lightsaber deflecting divine weapons with perfect economy of motion while shepherding civilians behind him. Ahsoka's aggressive Jarkai style tore through Tenma formations, her youthful energy allowing constant movement that kept enemies off balance. And Anakin fought with the kind of barely controlled ferocity that made Obi-Wan worry, but proved devastatingly effective against constructs that expected calculated resistance. "They're learning," Anakin warned between strikes. "Each one I destroy, the next one adjusts its tactics slightly. They're sharing combat data." "Then we adapt faster," Obi-Wan replied, using a force push to send three Tenma warriors flying into each other. "Ahsoka, form up, pattern Delta 7. The three Jedi shifted into a triangular formation they'd practiced 100 times, each covering the other's blind spots while maintaining aggressive pressure on the enemy. It was classic Jedi tactics, refined through years of Clone Wars combat, and it worked. The Tenma constructs, for all their divine authority, couldn't adapt fast enough to counter coordinated force users working in perfect sync. "Civilians evacuated," a goblin militia leader called out. "Jedi, fall back. We're bringing up siege weapons." The Jedi retreated in good order, and moments later, massive magical artillery pieces, grown from the city's walls like organic cannons, opened fire with beams of concentrated energy that burned through Tenma ranks. The defensive systems of Tempest were impressive, blending magic and engineering in ways that shouldn't work but clearly did. Rimuru appeared beside them, breathing normally despite having just fought off a dozen Tenma elites. "Good work with the civilians. You three understand something most warriors forget. Victory isn't just about defeating enemies. It's about making sure your people survive to see it." "It's what Jedi are taught from childhood," Obi-Wan replied. "We are guardians of peace and justice, not soldiers of conquest. Protecting the innocent takes precedence over defeating enemies. Even when the enemies are literal divine beings trying to erase your existence. Especially then," Anakin interjected, surprising everyone, including himself, with the conviction in his voice. If we abandon our principles just because the enemy is powerful, then we've already lost what we were trying to protect. Rimuru studied Anakin with those golden eyes that saw too much. That's wise. I hope you remember that philosophy when you're tested. The truly dangerous moments aren't when enemies threaten you, they're when they offer you everything you want. Before Anakin could respond, the battle reached a crescendo. Diablo and the Seraph's conflict had torn massive rifts in space itself, revealing the chaotic void between dimensions. The primordial demon was winning, his mastery of darkness and annihilation gradually overwhelming the Seraph's holy authority. But the cost was becoming apparent. Parts of the city were simply ceasing to exist where their powers clashed, reality unable to withstand such concentrated destruction. "Enough," Rimuru said quietly, but his voice carried across the entire battlefield with supernatural clarity. "Diablo, stand down. Everyone, clear the area." The demon immediately obeyed, withdrawing from combat with the Seraph and bowing deeply to Rimuru. "As you command, my lord." The Seraph, damaged but still functional, turned its attention fully to Rimuru. "You dare interrupt divine judgment?" "I dare quite a lot," Rimuru replied, and suddenly the playful leader was gone entirely, replaced by something that made the Seraph actually step back. The air grew heavy, space itself compressing as Rimuru's true nature became visible to those with the senses to perceive it. "You came to my city. You attacked my people. You threatened children who have done nothing to deserve your divine judgment beyond being born different from what you consider acceptable. And now you're going to leave and deliver a message to whoever sent you." The Seraph raised its weapons. "I am divine authority. I do not retreat. I do not turn null," Rimuru said quietly, and raised one hand. What happened next would haunt the Jedi's dreams for years to come. The space around the Seraph simply ceased to exist, not destroyed or transformed, but returned to absolute nothingness, the primordial void from which creation had emerged. The divine construct didn't have time to scream before it was unmade, its essence scattered beyond recovery, its power absorbed into Rimuru's incomprehensible reserves. When reality reasserted itself, the Seraph was simply gone, and Rimuru stood alone in a perfectly circular area where even the ground had been temporarily removed from existence before reforming. "That," Obi-Wan whispered, "was power on a scale I didn't think was possible." He didn't defeat it. He erased it from existence entirely. "Master," Ahsoka's voice was shaken. "I felt him through the Force when he did that. For just a moment, it was like sensing a black hole made of will and purpose. Something so vast and empty that it could swallow stars without effort." Anakin said nothing, but his mechanical hand was clenched so tightly the servos whined in protest. He'd felt it too, power beyond measure, wielded not by a Sith consumed by darkness or a Jedi bound by restraint, but by someone who'd simply become so overwhelmingly powerful that moral categories seemed almost irrelevant. And yet, Rimuru had used that terrible power to protect his people, not to conquer, not to dominate, but to defend. The remaining Tenma forces, witnessing their Seraph's annihilation, broke formation. The tear in the sky began to close as divine command withdrew, recognizing that this assault had failed catastrophically. Within minutes, the battlefield was clear, the last Tenma constructs fleeing back to whatever celestial realm had spawned them. Victory, but at what cost? Rimuru surveyed the damage. Parts of the city destroyed, civilians wounded despite evacuation efforts, defenders who'd given their lives to hold the line. His expression was tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "Casualty report," he ordered quietly. A subordinate, some kind of insectoid humanoid with official-looking insignia, stepped forward. 37 confirmed dead, 143 wounded, structural damage to 15% of the Eastern District. "It could have been much worse, my lord." 37 souls who trusted me to protect them, Rimuru replied. "That's 37 too many." Benimaru approached, his flames extinguished now but scorch marks covering his armor. Lord Rimuru, we held. The Tenma came with overwhelming force, and we broke them. This is a victory. Is it? Rimuru turned to face the three Jedi, who'd watched the entire exchange. You three fought beside us today, despite having no stake in this conflict. You protected civilians you just met, fought enemies you didn't understand, and risked your lives for people who probably look like monsters to you. Why? Obi-Wan stepped forward, choosing his words carefully. Because we are Jedi. We serve the Force, and the Force encompasses all life, regardless of species, appearance, or origin. When we saw beings threatening innocence, the choice was clear. That's not heroism. It's simply what any decent person would do. Not any person, Rimuru countered. Most would have stayed neutral or fled, or even joined the side that looked more divine. But you saw past appearances to recognize that my people were defending their homes against genocidal zealots. That takes wisdom many far older beings lack. He extended his hand. Thank you, Jedi. Your help today saved lives that would have been lost without you. Obi-Wan clasped the offered hand, and in that moment of contact, he felt through the Force just how ancient Rimuru's soul truly was. Not in years, perhaps, but in accumulated experience and understanding. This being had seen darkness, had wielded terrible power, and had somehow emerged from those trials still capable of compassion. The Tenma will return, Rimuru continued. This was a probing assault, testing our defenses. The real attack will come soon, with forces far beyond what we saw today. If you're still here when that happens. He trailed off meaningfully. Then we'll fight beside you again, Anakin said before Obi-Wan could offer diplomatic alternatives. These divine beings are no different from the Sith. Convinced their power gives them the right to judge and destroy. Someone needs to show them they're wrong. Rimuru smiled, genuine warmth breaking through his leader's mask. You know, Anakin Skywalker, I think we're going to get along very well. Come on, let's get you three to medical facilities. Then we need to discuss strategy. If the Tenma are escalating this quickly, we're looking at full-scale divine invasion within days. As they walked through the damaged but defiant city, surrounded by monsters who were rebuilding and helping each other with touching community spirit, the Jedi began to understand what they'd stumbled into. This wasn't just a war between nations or even between species. This was a fundamental conflict about whether beings deemed different had the right to exist, whether power justified authority, and whether the strong had obligations to protect the weak rather than simply dominating them. It was, in many ways, the same conflict the Jedi Order had faced for millennia, just on a far more literal and apocalyptic scale. And as Anakin walked beside Rimuru, listening to the Slime Demon Lord explain defensive strategies and civilian protection protocols, a thought crystallized in his mind that would prove prophetic. Here was power beyond measure, wielded by someone who'd chosen protection over domination. It was possible. Power without corruption, strength without cruelty. If this being could do it, perhaps there was hope for Anakin Skywalker's own demons after all. The war room of Tempest's government building was a strange blend of medieval fantasy and advanced technology that made the Jedi's heads spin. Holographic displays floated alongside enchanted maps that updated in real time. Magical sensors fed data to analytical systems that seemed to operate through some hybrid of technology and will. It was everything Republic strategists would consider impossible, functioning perfectly because the beings using it simply believed it should work. Rimuru stood at the center table, various subordinates arrayed around him. Benimaru leaned against a wall, arms crossed and flames still flickering around his fingers. Shion stood at attention, her massive blade resting against her shoulder. Diablo had materialized from shadows near the door, his golden eyes tracking every movement in the room. And dozens of other powerful beings, each one radiating enough power to qualify as a strategic asset in the Clone Wars, filled the remaining space. "Status report," Rimuru ordered. his casual demeanor from earlier replaced by focused command presence. A lizard man in military regalia stepped forward. "My lord, the eastern defenses held but took significant damage. We've pulled back to secondary positions and established overlapping fields of fire. The Goblin Engineering Corps is already reinforcing weak points, but we need at least 12 hours before those sections are combat-ready again." "Which we won't have," Rimuru said grimly. "The Tenma don't give us time to prepare. That's the point. They want to keep us reacting, never allowing us to establish superior defensive positions." "What about civilian evacuation?" An insectoid administrator consulted floating data screens. 93% of non-combatants are now in secure shelters. The remaining 7% are either militia volunteers or specialists required for infrastructure maintenance. We've stockpiled supplies for a siege of up to 30 days. "Good. Medical facilities?" "At capacity but managing," another subordinate reported. "The Jedi's intervention at the Eastern Gate prevented what would have been a massacre. Without their assistance, casualty projections would have been triple what we actually sustained." All eyes turned to Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka, who stood somewhat awkwardly to one side. They were guests in this war council, observers to a conflict they barely understood. "Don't thank us yet," Obi-Wan said carefully. "We still don't fully understand what we're facing. These Tenma, you called them divine constructs. Are they truly beings from your world's concept of heaven?" "More like heaven's weapons," Rimuru explained, manipulating the holographic display to show tactical data. "In this world, there exists a hierarchy of power. Humans, monsters, demon lords, true dragons, and at the very top, divine beings who claim authority over reality itself. The Tenma serve those divine beings as their military arm, angels created to enforce celestial will across the mortal plane. And their goal is genocide," Anakin stated flatly. "They want to wipe out your entire nation because you dared to create a society where monsters are equal to humans." "Essentially," Diablo interjected, his voice carrying dark amusement. "The divine hierarchy views monsters as lesser beings meant to serve or be destroyed. A nation where Oni, goblins, lizardmen, and humans live as equals violates their fundamental worldview. Add in Lord Rimuru's evolution into a true demon lord, and you have a civilization that represents everything celestial authority fears, proof that their ordained order is neither natural nor inevitable." Ahsoka frowned, her montrals twitching with agitation. "That's insane. Judging beings based on what they are rather than who they are, destroying entire civilizations because they don't fit someone's idea of proper order. That's exactly the kind of thinking the Jedi Order was founded to oppose." "Then you understand why we must fight," Rimuru replied. "This isn't about territory or resources. This is existential. The Tenma won't stop until either we're destroyed or they are. There's no negotiation, no compromise, no peace treaty. Just survival or extinction." Obi-Wan studied the tactical displays, his strategic mind parsing the information despite the alien context. "You said this was a probing assault. What do you expect in the main attack?" Benimaru answered, his tone grim. "Last time the Tenma launched a major offensive against a demon lord's territory, they committed 12 Seraph-class units, 300,000 lesser divine constructs, and a throne, a god-class being that commands entire angel armies. They razed the target nation in 72 hours, killed every living thing within 100 kilometers, and salted the earth so nothing would grow there for centuries." "That's not warfare," Anakin said quietly. "That's annihilation." "Welcome to divine justice," Diablo said with dark irony. "The gods of this world are not benevolent protectors, Jedi. They are absolute tyrants who brook no challenge to their authority. When monsters, beings they view as inherently inferior, dare to achieve civilization that rivals or exceeds human kingdoms, it represents a fundamental threat to their cosmic order. They must destroy us, not because we've done anything wrong, but because our very existence questions their right to rule." The room fell silent as the Jedi absorbed this. It was uncomfortably familiar. The same kind of absolutism that the Sith embraced. The same conviction that might made right and that certain beings were simply superior by nature, rather than choice. How do you fight that? Obi-Wan asked. Against Seraph-class beings like the one we saw today, against God-class entities that can reshape reality. How does any mortal nation mount a defense? Rimuru's expression became complicated, proud and regretful in equal measure. We fight with beings who have transcended mortal limitations. My evolution into a true demon lord gave me power on par with the Tenma's gods. Diablo is a primordial demon whose existence predates most divine beings. Benimaru has evolved into a fair Oni with flames that can burn even celestial matter. Each of my subordinates represents power that can stand against divine authority. You've become what they are, Anakin realized. To fight gods, you became godlike yourself. Yes, Rimuru's voice was quiet. I didn't choose this path lightly. Every evolution, every increase in power came with a price, either in lives taken or in pieces of my humanity lost. But the alternative was watching my people be destroyed by beings who viewed them as vermin to be exterminated. So I became strong enough to protect them, even if that meant becoming a monster in truth rather than just in name. The vulnerability in that admission caught the Jedi off guard. This being who'd casually erased a seraph from existence was expressing genuine regret about the path necessity had forced him down. That's the burden of power, Obi-Wan said softly. The Jedi understand. We train for years to master the Force, not because we enjoy having power, but because without that mastery, we can't protect those who need protection. The struggle is in wielding that power without letting it corrupt you. And how do you manage that? Rimuru asked with genuine curiosity. I've felt your power, all three of you. You're not as strong as my top-tier subordinates in raw output, but your control is remarkable. You channel immense energy while maintaining clarity of purpose. How? Before Obi-Wan could answer, alarms shrieked throughout the command center. Every display suddenly flashed red, and the magical sensors that had been calmly monitoring the perimeter erupted with warnings. Report! Rimuru snapped, all business instantly. My lord, massive energy signatures detected. The sensor operator's voice was strained. Not from the previous breach point, from everywhere. They're opening portals in a 360-degree perimeter around the city. Detecting multiple Seraph-class readings and... The operator's voice rose in alarm. Confirmed presence of a throne-class entity. They're not probing anymore. This is the main assault. The room exploded into coordinated chaos. Subordinates rushed to their assigned positions. Magical communication systems lit up with orders being transmitted to defense forces across the city, and barrier systems powered up with a hum that made the Jedi's teeth ache. Rimuru's face was stone. They're committing everything. This is their play to end us in one overwhelming strike. How long until they're in range? Benimaru demanded. Portals are opening now. First wave will arrive in less than 3 minutes. Then we meet them at the walls, Rimuru decided. All Demon Lord-class combatants to primary defensive positions. Secondary forces provide support fire and protect evacuation routes. And someone get me a tactical assessment of that throne. I need to know what we're facing. Lord Rimuru, Diablo's voice cut through the organized chaos. I recommend I engage the throne directly. Primordial demons are uniquely suited to combat against God-class entities. Our existences are antithetical to theirs. While I occupy its attention, you can coordinate the overall defense. Denied, Rimuru said immediately. I've seen what thrones can do, Diablo. You're powerful, but a God-class being could destroy even you if you face it alone. We fight together or not at all. Then we fight together, Anakin interrupted, his hand on his lightsaber. You said the throne commands angel armies. Armies can be disrupted, even divine ones. Let us help. Rimuru turned to the 3 Jedi, his expression torn. You don't have to do this. This isn't your war, isn't even your world. I can have a transport ready to take you beyond the battle zone in minutes. You could survive this. And do what? Ahsoka challenged. Watch from a distance as an entire civilization is destroyed. Hide while people who welcomed us, despite having every reason to be suspicious, fight for their lives? That's not what Jedi do. Besides, Obi-Wan added with a slight smile, we're rather trapped here until we can figure out how we arrived. We might as well be useful while we're stuck in your universe. And who knows? Perhaps 3 Force users who exist outside your world's power hierarchies might prove unexpectedly effective against enemies who've adapted to every power system they've encountered. Rimuru studied them for a long moment, then nodded sharply. All right, but stay close to either me or one of my commanders. The throne will target powerful unknowns, and you 3 register as something it's never seen before. That makes you priority threats. Wonderful, Anakin muttered. First the Sith, then killer gods. My life just keeps getting better. They moved as one toward the city's primary defensive position, a massive wall that blended grown crystal with enchanted stone, bristling with magical artillery and manned by thousands of monster soldiers who held their positions with disciplined determination, despite knowing what was coming. And what was coming made the first assault look like a minor skirmish. The sky darkened despite it being midday, the sun itself seeming to dim as divine power asserted dominance over natural phenomena. Then the portals opened, not tiers like before, but deliberate rifts in space that showed glimpses of a realm so bright and perfect, it hurt mortal eyes to perceive. Through those portals poured the Tenma host in numbers that beggared belief. Thousands of lesser divine constructs in organized battle formations. Dozens of Seraph-class beings, each one radiating power that the Jedi could feel even through the Force. Flying divine war beasts that defied categorization. Siege engines that seemed to be made of solidified prayer and righteous conviction. And above them all, descending with terrible majesty, came the throne. It was humanoid in the way a statue might be humanoid, technically the right shape, but so idealized and perfected that it lost all connection to actual humanity. 20 feet tall, armored in what looked like crystallized divinity itself, with 8 wings that spread wide enough to shadow city blocks. Its face was a mask of absolute judgment, showing neither mercy nor cruelty, because such emotions were beneath divine authority. When it spoke, its voice carried across the entire battlefield with crushing weight that made reality itself seem to listen and obey. Monster Nation of Tempest, Demon Lord Rimuru, your crimes against the Celestial Order have been judged. Your civilization's existence violates divine mandate. Surrender now and face merciful annihilation, or resist and ensure the suffering of all you claim to protect. Rimuru's response was to float up to eye level with the throne, impressive given the size difference, and project his voice with equal supernatural clarity. I've heard this speech before. Different gods, same arrogance. You claim divine authority, but authority only matters when backed by consent of the governed. My people chose to build this nation together. We chose equality over hierarchy, cooperation over domination. That makes us legitimate, regardless of what your celestial bureaucrats think. Legitimacy is not determined by mortal choice, the throne replied. The divine order predates your civilization by eons. Your defiance is meaningless. Then come and try to enforce your order, Rimuru challenged. But be warned, this monster nation has teeth, and we've learned from every enemy who's tried to destroy us. You're not the first divine power to think we'd be an easy target. You won't be the last to regret that assumption. The throne's mask remained expressionless, but something in its posture suggested anger, or the divine equivalent of anger. So be it. Tenma host, commence purification protocol. Leave nothing. The assault began. Thousands of divine constructs descended as one, their formations perfect, their coordination inhuman. Magical artillery from Tempest's walls opened fire, beams of concentrated energy that would vaporize tank divisions in the Republic, slamming into divine armor with varying effectiveness. Some Tenma fell, but most simply weathered the assault and continued advancing. All forces engage. Rimuru's order echoed across the battlefield through magical communication. Show them what happens when monsters stop apologizing for existing. Benimaru led the Eastern defense, his flames exploding across entire sections of divine forces. Shion's reality-warping blade carved through seraph armor that should have been invincible. Diablo engaged multiple high-tier angels simultaneously, his darkness consuming their holy light with primordial efficiency. And scattered throughout the defense, the three Jedi fought with desperate determination. Obi-Wan had taken position with a company of goblin defenders, his lightsaber deflecting divine projectiles that would have overwhelmed their shields. His Soresu mastery turned him into an unbreakable wall, holding a critical section of the defensive line through nothing but perfect technique and unwavering resolve. Ahsoka danced through aerial combat, her dual lightsabers carving through lesser Tenma that had broken through the initial defense. Her agility and force-enhanced reflexes made her nearly impossible to target, a tornado of green energy that left destroyed divine constructs in her wake. And Anakin had found himself fighting alongside Benimaru, and something dangerous was happening. "You hold back!" Benimaru called out between attacks, his flames consuming a cluster of Tenma. "I can feel it. Your power is greater than what you're using. Why restrain yourself in battle?" "Jedi discipline," Anakin replied, his lightsaber severing a seraph's wing in a strike that required mechanical strength most humans didn't possess. "We're taught to use only as much power as necessary, to avoid letting our emotions drive our combat." "Ridiculous." Benimaru's entire body ignited with flames that burned hot enough to melt stone. "Your emotions are what give you strength. Your desire to protect, your rage against injustice, your determination to survive. Those feelings are power waiting to be unleashed. Why cage them?" "Because unchecked emotion leads to the dark side," Anakin said, but his voice held uncertainty. He'd been taught this his entire life, but watching Benimaru fight with raw emotional intensity while maintaining perfect control made him question whether the Jedi Order's teachings were absolute truth or just one approach among many. "Your dark side sounds like an excuse for weakness," Benimaru countered, launching a massive fireball that consumed an entire formation of Tenma. "True strength is acknowledging your emotions and channeling them constructively. Denial doesn't make you pure. It makes you vulnerable to your own suppressed feelings." Before Anakin could respond, the battle shifted catastrophically. The throne itself descended, and with a gesture of one perfect hand, unleashed power that made everything they'd seen before look like children playing with toys. Divine judgment, heavenly purification. A beam of pure holy energy lanced down from the throne's position, striking the western wall with enough force to vaporize everything within 50 meters. Stone, metal, magical barriers, all simply ceased to exist, leaving a molten crater where moments before had been a fully manned defensive position. Hundreds dead in an instant. Hundreds more wounded by the shockwave. The western defenses collapsed entirely, leaving a gap that Tenma forces immediately exploited. "Western wall breach," someone screamed across the communications network. "They're pouring through. We can't hold." Rimuru appeared in the breach instantly, his power flaring to visible levels. "Everyone fall back to secondary positions. I'm closing this gap." But the throne was already targeting him for another strike, recognizing the Demon Lord as the primary threat. Its massive arm raised, divine energy gathering in quantities that would obliterate not just Rimuru, but entire city blocks. That's when something unexpected happened, something that would echo through both universes. Anakin Skywalker, feeling the desperate need to protect, sensing thousands of lives about to be snuffed out, reached deeper into the Force than he ever had before. Not with Jedi control and restraint, but with raw emotion. Fear for the innocent, rage against the unjust, determination to stand against tyranny regardless of how powerful it claimed to be. And the Force answered. Not with the careful, measured responses the Jedi taught. The Force erupted through Anakin like a star-going supernova, his power output suddenly spiking to levels that made even Benimaru look impressed. With a roar of defiance, Anakin hurled a force push of such magnitude that it actually staggered the throne mid-strike, disrupting its attack enough that the beam went wide, destroying empty ground instead of Rimuru and half the city. The throne's mask turned toward Anakin, and for the first time, its voice held something other than absolute certainty. It held surprise. Anomaly detected. Unknown power source. Foreign reality signature. You do not belong to this universe. Anakin stood in the center of the breach, his lightsaber blazing blue, his mechanical hand smoking from the power he'd channeled, and his eyes holding an intensity that made him look less like a Jedi and more like something far more primal. "You're right," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet battlefield. "I don't belong here. I'm from a galaxy where we fight tyranny every day, where we stand against those who claim their power gives them the right to judge others. And you know what I've learned fighting Sith Lords and Separatist armies and every other enemy who thought they could crush the Republic." He raised his lightsaber in challenge. "The bigger they are, the harder they fall. So come on, divine being. Let's see if your celestial authority can stand against someone who doesn't believe in it." The throne studied Anakin for a long moment. Then it raised both arms, and divine energy gathered in quantities that made the previous attack look minor. "Your courage is noted, Anomaly. Your death will be swift." "Anakin, no!" Obi-Wan's voice cut across the battlefield, filled with alarm. But the Chosen One wasn't backing down. Neither, however, would he face the throne alone. Rimuru appeared beside Anakin in a blur of motion, his power flaring to match the throne's. "You challenged a god-class being to single combat. That's either bravery or insanity, and I haven't decided which. Either way, you're not doing it alone." Benimaru landed on Anakin's other side, flames roaring around him. "If the outsider's going to fight a throne, then I'm not missing this." Diablo materialized from shadows, his smile terrifying. A primordial demon, a true demon lord, an Oni lord, and an anomalous warrior from another reality. This should prove educational for our divine opponent. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan joined them moments later, lightsabers ignited, their presence making the formation complete. 3 Jedi and 3 of Tempest's most powerful defenders, standing together against a being that claimed absolute divine authority. The throne looked at them, and for the first time, its voice held something that might have been respect. "You face certain death with courage. This will be remembered when your civilization is erased from history." "Then let's give you something worth remembering," Rimuru replied. "Because this civilization isn't going anywhere. Not today. Not ever." The throne attacked, and the defenders of Tempest answered with everything they had. The real battle was about to begin, and Anakin Skywalker, standing shoulder to shoulder with beings from another reality entirely, channeling emotions the Jedi Order taught him to suppress, was about to learn whether power wielded with passion could be controlled without corruption. His future, and perhaps the future of the entire Jedi Order, hung in the balance of this impossible battle. The throne's attack was apocalyptic in scale. Twin beams of pure divine judgment that screamed through the air with the force of heavenly condemnation made manifest. Each beam carried enough destructive power to level mountains, and they were aimed with surgical precision at Anakin and Rimuru, the 2 beings the throne had identified as the greatest threats. But they weren't alone. "Spatial severance," Rimuru's voice rang out, and the space between them and the beams literally split, redirecting the divine energy harmlessly into the sky, where it dissipated in explosions that lit up the clouds like false suns. "Hell Flare," Benimaru launched a counterattack, flames of such intensity that they burned through the Tenma forces protecting the throne's flanks, creating corridors of destruction that allowed the defenders to advance. "Death Streak!" Diablo's darkness manifested as razor-thin lines that sliced through reality itself, cutting down Seraph-class beings that tried to intercept their charge. The primordial demon's power made the very concept of divine protection seem laughable. His existence predated most gods, and he knew exactly how to unmake their servants. and the Jedi. The Jedi fought in ways that made both their enemies and allies question what they thought they knew about Force users. Obi-Wan moved with perfect economy, his lightsaber deflecting divine projectiles back at their sources with Sorasu precision refined over decades. But he'd added something new. Lessons learned from watching Tempest's defenders. Where before he would have simply blocked and countered, now he used the Force to redirect enemy attacks into each other, creating chaos in Tenma formations that relied on perfect coordination. Form 3 adaptation, he called to Ahsoka, his voice calm despite the apocalyptic battle. Use their numbers against them, make them their own worst obstacle. Ahsoka understood immediately. Her dual lightsabers became conductors for a symphony of controlled chaos, each deflection calculated to send divine energy toward other Tenma warriors. Each force pushed time to throw enemies into each other's attack patterns. She'd learned from watching Cheyenne fight. Raw power was impressive, but clever application of moderate power could achieve devastating results. "This is actually working," she called back, exhilaration mixing with terror as she deflected what should have been a killing blow into the seraph that had fired it. "Master Obi-Wan, they're so used to overwhelming individual opponents that they don't know how to adapt when we turn their coordination against them." But it was Anakin who had truly transformed in this battle, and that transformation terrified Obi-Wan, even as it proved devastatingly effective. The Chosen One had always fought with barely controlled aggression, using Form V's powerful strikes to overwhelm opponents through sheer intensity. But now, fighting beside beings who channeled pure emotion into combat effectiveness, Anakin had found something new, or perhaps something the Jedi Order had spent his entire training trying to suppress. He fought with his feelings fully unleashed, but not uncontrolled. His fear for the innocents behind him became protective fury that manifested as force barriers strong enough to deflect Seraph-class attacks. His rage against the throne's absolute judgment translated into telekinetic strikes of such power that they actually staggered God-class constructs. And his determination to prove that might didn't make right channeled through his lightsaber into strikes that carved through divine armor with impossible effectiveness. "You're not holding back anymore," Benimaru observed with fierce approval, fighting beside Anakin as they carved through Tenma ranks. "That's the warrior I sensed earlier. Your power is glorious." "This isn't," Anakin began, then stopped himself. It wasn't the Jedi way, but was the Jedi way absolute. Watching Rimuru wield godlike power with retained compassion, seeing Benimaru channel pure emotion into protective fury without losing his sanity, these challenged everything the Order had taught him about the necessity of emotional suppression. The throne recognized the shift in Anakin's power immediately. Its mask turned toward the Jedi Knight, and its voice carried acknowledgement of a genuine threat. "The anomaly's power grows. Fascinating. You channel passion without corruption, desire without selfishness. This should not be possible, according to the parameters of your reality's power system." "Maybe the parameters are wrong," Anakin shot back, using a force-enhanced leap to close the distance to the throne, his lightsaber striking against divine armor with impacts that created shockwaves. "Maybe my Order's teachings are incomplete. Maybe there's a path to power that doesn't require choosing between strength and compassion." The throne blocked Anakin's strikes with one massive hand, its divine substance proving resistant even to a lightsaber's cutting power. "Or perhaps you simply delay the inevitable. Every being who embraces passion eventually falls to it. Your resistance is admirable but futile." "Then let me demonstrate how futile I can be." Anakin channeled the Force through his mechanical hand, something he'd never attempted before, and the prosthetic became a conduit for power that made its systems scream in protest. His next strike carried telekinetic force behind the physical blow, and for the first time, the throne's armor cracked. A hairline fracture, nothing more, but it proved the throne could be damaged. "Anomalies found the weak point," Benimaru roared. "All heavy hitters, focus fire on the throne's chest plate. We crack that, we can reach its core." The coordinated assault intensified. Rimuru unleashed Megiddo, hyper-focused water droplets that moved at relativistic speeds, each one carrying kinetic energy measured in nuclear explosion equivalents. Benimaru's flames concentrated into a single lance of fire that burned hot enough to make even divine armor begin to glow. Diablo's darkness manifested as cutting edges that sliced at the cracks, widening them incrementally. And the three Jedi added their power to the assault in ways that defied conventional force usage. Obi-Wan reached out through the Force, feeling for structural weaknesses in the throne's armor the same way he might analyze a building's stability. He found stress points, places where the divine construct's own power distribution created vulnerabilities, and called out coordinates that let the others focus their attacks with surgical precision. Ahsoka channeled the Force into pure kinetic energy, launching continuous telekinetic strikes that functioned like invisible battering rams against the damaged sections. Each impact was modest individually, but their relentless rhythm prevented the throne from regenerating its armor between major attacks. And Anakin did something that would have gotten him expelled from the Jedi Order if his masters could see it. He reached out to the darkness he'd always feared. The anger and fear that the Jedi taught were paths to corruption. But instead of letting those emotions control him, instead of surrendering to them as the Sith did, he channeled them the way Rimuru channeled his ultimate skills, as tools, as resources, as power that could be directed by will rather than being defined by nature. The Force around him darkened visibly, lightning crackling at his fingertips in a technique he'd seen Count Dooku use but never attempted himself. But unlike Sith lightning, which was powered by hate and meant to cause suffering, Anakin's lightning was powered by protective fury and aimed only at those threatening innocents. "Anakin, no!" Obi-Wan's voice cut through the battle, filled with horror. "That's dark side technique. You're walking the path to what?" Anakin challenged, his lightning joining the concentrated assault on the throne's weakening armor. "To power I can control? Master, look around us. These beings wield forces that would make Yoda's power look modest, and they haven't fallen to corruption. Maybe the dark side isn't about the power you use. Maybe it's about why you use it and what you're willing to sacrifice for it." The throne's armor shattered. The combined assault finally proved too much for even divine construction. The chest plate fractured, pieces of crystallized divinity falling away to reveal what lay beneath, a core of pure energy, pulsing with power that made all previous displays look restrained. "Impressive," the throne acknowledged, its voice unchanged despite the catastrophic damage. "But insufficient. You damage my vessel. You do not harm my essence. Divine beings cannot be destroyed by mortal means." "Good thing we're not all mortal," Rimuru replied, and his power shifted to something that made reality itself recoil. Turn null, void, collapse. What Rimuru unleashed was the opposite of creation, the primordial nothingness from which all existence emerged and to which all existence would eventually return. It was power that predated gods, that existed before divine authority had meaning, that simply negated the very concept of being. The throne tried to defend, raising barriers of divine power that should have been absolute. But turn null wasn't an attack that could be blocked. It was the erasure of the space where defenses existed, the negation of the reality where the throne stood. For the first time, the God-class being showed something approaching fear. "This power? You wield nihility itself. How can a mortal command—" "I told you," Rimuru said quietly, his golden eyes holding no triumph, only grim necessity. "I'm not mortal anymore. I became what I needed to be to protect my people, even if that meant becoming something that could threaten gods." The void energy began consuming the throne's exposed core, unmaking the divine essence one layer at a time. But even as it died, the throne managed one final strike, a desperation attack aimed not at Rimuru, who it recognized as beyond its ability to harm, but at the being who had inspired this impossible cooperation, at Anakin Skywalker. "If I fall anomaly, you fall with me. Your reality will reclaim you, and you will face judgment for the power you've embraced today." Divine energy lanced toward Anakin with speed that even his force-enhanced reflexes couldn't dodge. He had a split second to realize he'd pushed too far, embraced too much power too quickly. And now he would pay for that hubris with... Rimuru appeared between Anakin and the attack, his form taking the full impact of the throne's dying strike. Divine energy that could unmake souls crashed against the Demon Lord's body, and for a moment, everyone thought they were about to watch Rimuru die protecting a warrior he'd known for less than a day. But Rimuru didn't fall. He stood firm, his unique skill Beelzebub consuming the divine energy, his intrinsic resistances, built through countless evolutions, allowing him to withstand what should have been an instantly lethal attack. He shuddered under the impact, his form flickering as even his tremendous power struggled against God-class assault. But he held. And the throne, its core fully consumed by turn null, finally ceased to exist. The God-class being didn't explode or collapse. It simply stopped being, erased from reality so thoroughly that even divine resurrection systems couldn't retrieve its essence. The battlefield froze. Tenma forces across the entire combat zone halted mid-attack, their coordination broken by the loss of their commanding intelligence. Seraph-class beings looked at where the throne had been, their expressionless masks somehow conveying shock despite having no faces. Then, as one, the entire Tenma host began retreating, not fleeing in panic, but executing an organized withdrawal that spoke of pre-programmed contingencies activated when a throne was lost. They pulled back through the portals they'd entered from, gathering their wounded and their dead, falling back to regroup and reassess. Within minutes, the sky was clear. The assault that was supposed to annihilate Tempest had been broken. Victory, but at a terrible cost. Rimuru collapsed to one knee, his form stabilizing but clearly damaged. Benimaru caught him before he could fall further, flames dying down to reveal the Oni's concern. "Lord Rimuru, the throne's attack." "I'm fine," Rimuru managed, though his voice was strained. "The damage was severe, but Raphael is already working on regeneration. I'll recover. The question is..." He looked at Anakin with eyes that held complicated emotions. "Are you all right? And more importantly, do you understand what you just did?" Anakin stared at his hands, one flesh and one mechanical, both still crackling with residual force energy that looked disturbingly like Sith lightning. Around him, Tenma bodies littered the ground, divine warriors he'd helped destroy, using techniques the Jedi Order classified as forbidden. He'd channeled his emotions, touched the darkness, and used powers he'd been taught would inevitably lead to corruption. And yet, he didn't feel corrupted. He felt powerful, yes. Exhilarated by the victory, certainly, but not consumed by darkness, not driven by hate, not lost to the kind of absolute self-absorption that defined fallen Jedi. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "Master Obi-Wan, We'll discuss it later," Obi-Wan interrupted, his voice tight with emotions he was clearly struggling to process. He looked at Rimuru, then at Anakin, then at the destroyed battlefield around them. "Right now, we need to help with casualty recovery and defensive restoration. But Anakin, what you did today will have consequences. Ones we'll need to address before we return home." "If we return home," went unspoken but heard by everyone. The aftermath of the battle was a blur of organized chaos. Medical teams rushed to treat the wounded, hundreds injured, dozens dead despite their best efforts. Engineering Corps began repairing the shattered western wall. Cleanup crews started the grim task of removing bodies and destroyed constructs. And in the command center, as sunset painted the battered city in shades of orange and red, the defenders gathered to assess what they'd accomplished and what it had cost. "Final casualty count," Rimuru requested, his voice heavy with the weight of command. An administrator stepped forward, data compiled with remarkable efficiency given the chaos. 217 confirmed dead, 438 wounded seriously enough to require extended treatment, Structural damage to approximately 30% of the Western District and 15% of the Eastern defenses. We held, my lord. But it was close. Too close, Rimuru said quietly. 217 souls lost because divine authority decided we don't deserve to exist. 217 souls who died defending their home against genocidal tyranny, Benimaru corrected firmly. And thousands more who lived because we stood firm. Because you led us, because our allies fought beside us, because we refused to accept divine judgment as final. He gestured to the 3 Jedi. Including these 3, who had every reason to stay neutral but chose to stand with us anyway. All eyes turned to Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka. Battered, exhausted, and standing in a command center that belonged to a nation of monsters, having just helped fight off a divine army in a war that wasn't theirs. Why? Rimuru asked the question that everyone wanted answered. You're stranded here, you barely understand this world, and by fighting beside us, you've made yourselves targets for divine retribution. The Tenma won't forget that beings from another reality interfered with their judgment. They'll hunt you specifically now. Why take that risk? Obi-Wan was silent for a long moment, carefully considering his words. Because we're Jedi. Our purpose is to stand against tyranny and protect those who cannot protect themselves. When we saw what the Tenma represented, absolute authority claiming the right to destroy an entire civilization simply because it challenged their worldview, the choice was clear. That kind of thinking is exactly what we've spent our lives opposing. Even if it means my Padawan experimented with powers that our order considers forbidden, the words came out more bitter than Obi-Wan intended. Even if it means watching my former apprentice walk a path that looks disturbingly similar to the one Sith take. I'm not falling to the dark side, Anakin said, his voice carrying conviction that surprised even himself. Master, I know what I did looks bad by Jedi standards, but I also know what I felt, and I didn't feel hatred or desire for domination or any of the corruption the Order warns about. I felt determination to protect, anger at injustice, and fear for innocence. Those emotions powered my attacks, but they didn't control me. He looked at Rimuru. You showed me something I didn't think was possible, power without corruption. You wield abilities that could reshape worlds, and yet you use them only to protect your people. You've become something beyond mortal limitations, and you haven't lost your compassion. That proves the Jedi teachings might be incomplete. Or it proves you're making excuses for dangerous behavior, Obi-Wan countered, but his voice lacked full conviction. He'd seen what Anakin accomplished, had watched his former Padawan channel emotions the Order taught should be suppressed, and had witnessed the results. Not a fallen Jedi consumed by darkness, but a warrior who'd found a way to use passion as fuel rather than letting it become poison. I think, Ahsoka interjected carefully, that maybe both things can be true. The Jedi teachings exist for good reasons. We've seen what happens when Force users embrace their emotions without wisdom or restraint. But maybe there's middle ground. Maybe the choice isn't between suppressing all feeling or surrendering to every passion. A Padawan speaking wisdom beyond her years, Diablo observed from his position near the shadows. Perhaps your order should listen to the youngest among you rather than assuming ancient traditions cannot be questioned. Our traditions exist because they've been tested over millennia, Obi-Wan replied, but even he could hear the defensiveness in his tone. And this world has beings who've existed longer than your order has, Rimuru said gently. Diablo is a primordial demon. He's witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, seen every variation of power system and moral philosophy. And even he admits that absolute rules rarely account for reality's complexity. What would you have me do? Obi-Wan asked, and for the first time, he sounded lost. Return to the Jedi Council and explain that my former Padawan used Force lightning, channeled his anger into combat effectiveness, and emerged not corrupted but stronger. That everything we've been taught about emotional suppression might be wrong because we saw a demon lord from another universe who wields godlike power without falling to darkness. I would have you do what Jedi are meant to do. Rimuru replied. Seek truth, even when it challenges your preconceptions. Your Padawan didn't fall today. He evolved. Whether that evolution proves sustainable when he returns to your galaxy, that's something you'll discover together. Before Obi-Wan could respond, the magical sensors that had been relatively quiet since the Tenma retreat suddenly flared with new activity. Lord Rimuru, the sensor operator called out urgently, detecting spatial distortion similar to the one that brought the Jedi here. It's opening directly above the city. Same energy signature, same dimensional frequency. Anakin felt it through the Force. A pulling sensation, a call from reality itself demanding he return to where he belonged. The mysterious distortion that had brought them here was reopening, offering passage back to their own universe. That's our way home, Ahsoka said quietly. The anomaly is reopening. If we don't take it now, we might never get another chance. Rimuru stood, pain from the throne's attack still visible in his posture, but his command presence restored. Then you need to go, while the passage is stable. Just like that, Anakin asked. We fight beside you, help break a divine invasion, and then just leave. That's how it has to be, Rimuru replied, but his smile was genuine. Anakin Skywalker, you asked earlier if I ever needed help again. I told you I hoped the multiverse wouldn't test that promise, but now I realize the help you've given me isn't just the battle. It's the reminder that principles matter more than power, that protection is a valid reason to become strong, and that evolution doesn't have to mean losing your soul. He extended his hand. Go back to your galaxy. Face whatever consequences come from what you've learned here. And remember, power is neither good nor evil. It's a tool. What matters is the hand that wields it and the heart that guides that hand. Anakin clasped the offered hand, and in that moment, he felt something pass between them. Not power, not technique, but understanding. A silent acknowledgement that both of them walked paths that frightened those around them, that both wielded power that could corrupt, and that both had chosen to use that power to protect rather than dominate. If I ever find a way back here, Anakin said quietly, I will help you again. That's a promise. I believe you, Rimuru replied. Now go. Your reality is calling, and dimensional passages are notoriously unstable. Miss this chance, and you might be stuck here permanently. The three Jedi made their way to the Republic cruiser, which had weathered the battle remarkably well thanks to Tempest's defensive barriers. Clone troopers were already running pre-flight checks, preparing for immediate departure. As they boarded, citizens of Tempest gathered, goblins and ogres, lizardmen and insectoids, demons and spirits, and beings that defied classification. They didn't cheer or celebrate. They simply stood in respectful silence, acknowledging warriors who'd fought for their survival despite having no obligation to do so. Master Obi-Wan, Ahsoka said as they strapped into their positions, what happens when we get back? What do we tell the Council about what we saw here? Obi-Wan was silent for a long moment. I don't know. The truth, I suppose. That we encountered a universe where different rules applied, where beings wielded power beyond our comprehension, and where our understanding of the Force proved incomplete. Whether they believe us, he trailed off meaningfully. Whether they believe us or not, Anakin said firmly, I know what I experienced. I know what I felt. And I know that Rimuru proved something the Jedi Order has always denied, that you can become powerful enough to challenge gods without losing your compassion. The cruiser lifted off, climbing toward the spatial distortion that hung in the sky like a wound in reality. Below them, Tempest spread out in all its impossible glory, a nation of monsters who'd built a civilization based on equality and mutual respect, who'd stood against divine judgment and survived. Approaching the anomaly, the pilot reported. Sensors are going crazy. Dimensional barriers are thin here. Whatever brought us is definitely taking us back. The ship entered the distortion, and reality twisted in that same nauseating way it had before. Stars bent. Colors that shouldn't exist burned against darkness, and the Force became a hurricane of contradictory sensations. Then they were through, emerging into normal space with familiar constellations overhead. The Republic's hyperspace beacons registered immediately, confirming they'd returned to their own galaxy. They were home. "That was real, right?" Ahsoka asked quietly. "We didn't imagine any of that?" "It was real," Obi-Wan confirmed, checking his personal logs and finding records of everything they'd experienced. "The question is what we do with that reality now that we're back in our own." Anakin said nothing, but his mechanical hand flexed unconsciously, and he could still feel the echo of power he'd channeled, lightning at his fingertips, emotions fueling rather than corrupting his abilities, and the knowledge that another path existed beyond what the Jedi Order taught. The seed had been planted. Whether it would grow into wisdom or corruption remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: Anakin Skywalker would never forget Rimuru Tempest. The demon lord who'd shown him that overwhelming power and genuine compassion weren't mutually exclusive. That becoming strong enough to protect everyone you cared about didn't require sacrificing your soul. And perhaps, just perhaps, that lesson would make all the difference when darkness came calling with promises of power to save those he loved. The future was unwritten, the path forward uncertain. But the Chosen One had glimpsed a different way, and that glimpse might just be enough to change destiny itself. The Republic cruiser, Resolute, docked at the nearest Republic outpost 3 days after emerging from the dimensional anomaly. Its crew exhausted, its Jedi passengers forever changed by what they'd witnessed in a universe where gods were real and monsters built civilizations. Commander Cody submitted his after-action report with military precision. Spatial anomaly encountered, unknown star system explored, assistance rendered to indigenous population under hostile attack, return via secondary anomaly manifestation. The facts were accurate. They were also utterly insufficient to convey what had actually happened. President Roslin would receive Obi-Wan's detailed account, careful, diplomatic, acknowledging both the wonders and dangers they'd encountered. The Jedi Council would read Ahsoka's perspective, noting her observations about alternative approaches to Force philosophy. And buried in classified archives, Anakin Skywalker's personal log would record truths that would terrify the Council if they ever fully understood their implications. The Tenma War continued in that other universe, with Rimuru Tempest and his nation of monsters standing defiant against divine authority that insisted they had no right to exist. Whether they would ultimately prevail remained unknown. The dimensional rift had closed permanently behind the departing Jedi, sealing two realities apart perhaps forever. But in those desperate hours of combat, 3 Jedi from the Galactic Republic and the defenders of the Jura Tempest Federation had proven something profound: that courage transcended universes, that the choice to protect innocence mattered more than the nature of those innocents, and that power, even overwhelming, God-threatening power, could be wielded with retained compassion if the wielder chose wisdom over domination. For Obi-Wan Kenobi, the experience reinforced his faith in Jedi principles while acknowledging they might not represent absolute truth. He would return to the Council humbled, questioning, more open to the possibility that the Order's ancient wisdom might benefit from examination rather than blind adherence. For Ahsoka Tano, witnessing a civilization where beings of vastly different natures coexisted as equals planted seeds that would flower years later when she made her own choices about the Jedi path. The memory of monsters defending their homes with honor would inform her understanding that appearances deceived and true character revealed itself in crisis. And for Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One whose prophesied destiny balanced between salvation and damnation, the encounter with Rimuru Tempest represented something far more dangerous and hopeful in equal measure. Proof that the dichotomy between emotional suppression and dark-side corruption might be false, that a third path existed where passion fueled protection rather than domination. Whether that understanding would save him from his future fall or merely give him false confidence in his ability to control powers meant to corrupt remained to be seen. The timeline stretched ahead, pregnant with possibilities both bright and terrible. But in a universe far from the familiar conflicts of the Clone Wars, Rimuru Tempest stood on the rebuilt western wall of his capital city, looking at stars that no longer contained 3 warriors from another reality, and smiled. "They'll be fine," he told Benimaru, who joined him in the evening vigil. "Anakin's got darkness in his future. I could sense it, that massive potential and the fear that drives it. But he's also got something most beings with that much power lack: genuine desire to protect others. That's a foundation. Whether he builds wisdom on it or falls despite it, that's his choice to make." "You gave him dangerous knowledge," Benimaru observed. "Showed him that emotions could be channeled rather than suppressed. If he falls to darkness using those lessons, then he'd have fallen anyway, just along a different path," Rimuru interrupted. "I didn't corrupt him. I showed him an alternative. What he does with that alternative is his responsibility, not mine. And if he does fall, if your lesson contributes to his corruption." Rimuru's expression grew distant, contemplating futures he couldn't see and choices that belonged to others. "Then I hope I also gave him enough understanding of what true corruption looks like that he'll recognize it before it's too late. The Tenma claim divine authority to justify genocide. I've met beings who gained overwhelming power and used it only to dominate. Anakin saw both extremes. Maybe that context will help him find balance. Or maybe," Diablo suggested from the shadows, "you're simply hoping your interference helped rather than harmed. A very mortal sentiment, my lord." "I'm not as divorced from mortality as you think, Diablo," Rimuru replied with a slight smile. "I remember being human. I remember fear and anger and love and all the emotions that make choices meaningful. The Jedi try to suppress those feelings, believing emotion leads inevitably to corruption. The Sith, or so Anakin described them, embrace emotion without wisdom, letting passion control rather than inform their actions. But there's middle ground. There has to be." He turned from the stars to face his subordinates, his golden eyes reflecting starlight and determination in equal measure. "We proved that today. We wielded power that could challenge gods, channeled emotions that could have consumed us, and emerged with our principles intact. If we can do it, so can Anakin Skywalker." "I have to believe that. Faith from a demon lord," Benimaru observed with amusement. "The universe is full of contradictions." "The best ones are," Rimuru agreed. "Far across dimensional barriers that neither science nor magic could easily pierce." Anakin Skywalker stood in the Jedi Temple meditation chamber, trying to reconcile what he'd experienced with what he'd been taught his entire life. The darkness was still there. The fear of loss, the anger at injustice, the desperate need to be strong enough to protect everyone he cared about. But now he'd seen proof that channeling those emotions didn't have to mean corruption, that passion could fuel protection, that power and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. The question was whether the Jedi Council would understand, or whether they'd see only a knight who'd experimented with forbidden techniques and needed to be restrained before he fell. "You're troubled," Obi-Wan's voice came from the doorway. His former master entered quietly, settling into meditation posture beside Anakin with familiar ease. "I used Force lightning," Anakin said bluntly. "I channeled anger and fear into combat effectiveness. I did everything the Council warns leads to the dark side, and I didn't fall. What am I supposed to do with that?" "You do what you've always done," Obi-Wan replied after a long pause. "You try to find balance between what you're capable of and what you should do with those capabilities. Anakin, I won't lie. What you did frightened me. It looked exactly like the techniques fallen Jedi use. And I've seen too many good people corrupted by similar choices. But," Anakin heard the unspoken qualification, "but I also saw the results. You weren't consumed by hatred or driven by selfish desire. You used those techniques to protect innocence and break a divine invasion. Intent matters, control matters, and somehow, you managed both. So I'm not in trouble." Obi-Wan's laugh was bitter. "Oh, you're absolutely in trouble. The Council will want explanations, demonstrations, and probably weeks of meditation examining your connection to the Force. They'll be worried, and rightfully so. What you did is precisely what the Order fears most: powerful emotion channeled into Force usage. Then what's changed? I'm changed, Obi-Wan admitted quietly. I've spent my entire life believing the Jedi way was the only safe path for Force users, but Rimuru Tempest and his nation proved that absolute rules might not account for reality's complexity. Maybe there are Force users who can safely channel emotion. Maybe you're one of them. Or maybe you're standing on the edge of a precipice, and one more step takes you into darkness I can't pull you back from. Helpful, Anakin said dryly. I'm not trying to be helpful. I'm trying to be honest. Obi-Wan stood, offering his hand to pull Anakin up. Come on. We have reports to file, debriefings to survive, and a council that's going to have many, many questions about what happened during our routine signal investigation. Let's face it together, like we've always done. Anakin took the offered hand, standing. And if they order me to never use those techniques again? To suppress what I learned? Then you'll have a choice to make, Obi-Wan replied. Between the Order's wisdom accumulated over millennia and your own understanding forged in a universe where different rules applied. I can't make that choice for you, Anakin. No one can. But whatever you decide, I'll stand beside you. That's what masters and apprentices do. It was a promise that would be tested in fires neither of them could yet imagine. When Anakin stood at the ultimate crossroads with darkness whispering promises and light demanding sacrifice. But for now, in this moment, with the memory of Rimuru Tempest's example fresh in his mind and proof that overwhelming power didn't require surrendering compassion, Anakin Skywalker faced his future with something he'd rarely felt before: hope. Not naive optimism, but the grounded hope of someone who'd seen an alternative path and believed it might be possible. The Tenma War raged on in a universe the Jedi could no longer reach. The Clone Wars continued in a galaxy that didn't know how close it had come to permanent dimensional catastrophe. And in the space between realities, the Force and ultimate skills and divine authority all flowed according to their own incomprehensible logic. But 3 Jedi had crossed that space, fought beside monsters against gods, and returned carrying knowledge that might just change everything. If wisdom could triumph over fear, if understanding could overcome dogma, and if the Chosen One could remember that true strength lay not in power unleashed, but in power wisely wielded. The future remained unwritten, but it had been touched by the impossible, changed by the improbable, and perhaps, just perhaps, saved by the collision of 2 universes that never should have met. And somewhere in the vast multiverse, Rimuru Tempest smiled and returned to the work of building a civilization where monsters and humans stood as equals, proving every day that the divine order claiming to rule reality was neither divine nor inevitable. 2 realities. One truth, that courage, compassion, and the choice to protect mattered more than power, appearance, or ordained destiny. May those who crossed between worlds remember that lesson when darkness came calling with